Hey guys, this is Benny Ricciardi with rotocurve.com, and I'm here with another section of Benny's Bats for Monday, July 27th. What we like to do here is go through each pitcher that's on the mound today, try to figure out what his weakness is, which guys he struggles with, and then look at the hitters on the other side of the other side of that game and figure out which guys profile best to have a good upside game today against that pitcher. So we try to go through it one by one. We talk about what the pitcher's weaknesses are. We talk about what hitters have those strengths, and try to get you some guys that'll help you make some money. So the first guy we're going to talk about today is Alex Wood. Wood's going up against Baltimore. He struggles with right-handed bats. Right-handed bats are hitting .303 against him with a whip of 1.53. And all 8 of the home runs that he's allowed this year have been to guys from the right side. So looking at that Baltimore team, you got a guy like Adam Jones. He's got a .415 WOBA with a .246 ISO number against left-handed pitching. So Jones is definitely somebody who should be on your radar today. His price is not too prohibitive on any of the sites, and I think he's going to make for a great upside play today. Another guy you can look at is Manny Machado. He's been really hot on top of that order for Baltimore. He's got a .369 WOBA and a .195 ISO number. So he's not a huge upside play today. He's not somebody who screams you got to use him. The problem I have with Machado is his price is up in most spots, so he's not cheap anymore. He's not a guy that you can slide into your rosters. If he is cheap in whatever site you're playing on, I think he makes for a decent play, but he's not one of the best options at third base today. I don't love him. You also have guys that stand out like Nolan Reimold. He could be somebody who's a good salary saver depending on what site you're playing on. He has a .373 WOBA and a .237 ISO number. So those are some pretty solid numbers against left-handed pitching on the season. Again, when lineups come out, depends where he's batting in the order, if he's even in there at all. But he could be a guy that has some upside for you as a good salary-saving cheap option. And another guy I was surprised about was Chris Davis. Even though it's a lefty-on-lefty matchup, he's actually hitting .371 in those situations this year with a .221 WOBA. With a .221 ISO number. So he has a .371 WOBA, .221 ISO number. So he actually kind of stands out a little bit, even though it is a lefty-lefty matchup. Next guy we can talk about on the other side of that game is Kevin Goldschmidt. Now, he really struggles with left-handed bats. They're hitting .310 against him this year with a whip of 168. The problem is there aren't a lot of left-handed bats that I really like on that Braves team. I mean, if you want to go for a guy like Brzezinski, be my guest. He's not somebody that I'm looking to use today. The one guy who I would like that stands out on the numbers is Freddie Freeman. Came back from injury 2 games ago, has a .396 WOBA and a .244 ISO number against right-handed pitching. So with Goldschmidt struggles against lefties and Freeman the way he hits right-handed pitching, I think he could be in play. The only thing is you gotta decide if you think that he's somebody who has come back from that injury, because he has only played in a couple games since coming off the DL. And he might still be a little rusty. I mean, he hasn't done anything to show me that he's really, completely back and healthy and give me the green light to play him so far yet. So just be a little cautious with it, but it would be a big upside play that's probably going to be low owned for tournaments. Next guy we can talk about is John Danks. Now, Danks has allowed a .315 batting average to right-handed bats with 12 home runs in 78 innings this year. But lately, the joke's been that he's been like side Danks because he's been really, really good in 3 of his last 4 starts. Has over 20-something points on DraftKings in each one of those, striking guys out, limiting the damage, going 6 or 7 innings into these games. And it's not really what we expect from Danks, and it's not really what his numbers have shown over the course of his career. But again, the guy's been hot lately, so putting bats against him hasn't really paid off. As a matter of fact, you probably had some losing rosters if you've been targeting guys against him lately. There are 2 guys on that Boston team, though, that I think you should look at. Xander Bogaerts does very well against left-handed pitching. .403 WOBA, only a 126 ISO, so he doesn't have a lot of power, but he is somebody that can get you a couple hits. If he's cheap on whatever site you're playing on, I think he makes for a really solid cash game play today. I don't think he has the home run upside. I don't think he's going to drive in a ton of runs, even though he's in that 3 spot. But I do think he's somebody that you can look at. The guy who has the most upside and is also shortstop eligible on DraftKings is Hanley Ramirez. He has a .359 WOBA, but a high .265 ISO number. So he is the guy that has some power. That could be the guy that, puts that 13th home run against right-handed bats onto Danks' resume this year. Next guy we can look at is Joe Kelly. Joe Kelly struggled with right-handed bats. He's allowed a .310 batting average with 7 home runs and 37 innings pitched. So the only right-handed bat that kind of stands out on that Chicago White Sox team is Jose Abreu. Now, he is not the same guy he was last year, so I don't think there's huge upside with him. But he does have a 359 WOBA. He does have an ISO of 195, which is okay. Righty on righty, he's the best guy on the Chicago White Sox team that I think you should look at if you're going to be looking at anybody on that team to target against Kelly today. Now, remember, Kelly doesn't go very far into the game, so you're probably going to be facing the Boston bullpen more than you're going to be facing Kelly. But you should get at least 2 at-bats, maybe 3 against him for somebody who bats high up in the order like Abreu does. Let's see. The next guy we can talk about is Anibal Sanchez. He's not really somebody that I'm looking to target heavy against today, but right-handed bats have actually done better against him this year with a 278 batting average and 12 home runs and 69 innings pitched. There are really no right-handed bats on that Tampa Bay team that have huge WOBAs and ISO scores against right-handed pitching. So there's nobody that really reaches the threshold that we usually look for. The one guy who does reach the threshold is a left-handed bat, and that's John Jaso. I think he's in play at the catching position. He's got a 398 WOBA against right-handed pitching and a 186 ISO. Now, I wanted to take a second to kind of talk about what I mean when I say those thresholds. When we go through and look at the numbers, there are certain things that we look for. We try to find guys with WOBAs over 360 against that handedness. That's like the first check mark off the box for us. And then what we really want for the guys who are good tournament plays is for them to also have ISO scores that are above 200. The higher above 200, the better. So when we get some of these guys that have ISO scores of like 300, those are the guys who have been hitting a lot of the home runs that we've been seeing lately because they do have the big power numbers. They do have the big power upside. Like the other day when we mentioned Alex Rodriguez, yesterday when we mentioned Logan Forsythe, people are like, how do you come up with these guys? Well, it's not like I'm picking these names out of a hat. What I'm doing is looking for pitchers who have given up a decent amount of home runs to a certain handedness of batter, and then trying to find a handedness of batter that has the most power. And the WOBA number is basically the number that translates best to their fantasy score. So that is telling you how many total bases, which basically translates to fantasy points that the guy has. So if you have a guy with a high WOBA number, that usually means he's going to be a solid play in a cash game and a decent play for a GPP. If the guy also has a high ISO score, then that means he has a good chance for a home run, which makes him a great play for a GPP. So if we can have a guy with a high WOBA and a high ISO against a pitcher who gives it up to that handedness of batter, that's basically the perfect storm. So that's what we try to do in this Benny's Bat section, is put together the guys who are in that kind of situation, because that's the situation that over time has shown to be the one that, produces the most home runs, and home runs produce the highest fantasy score. So that's just a quick teaching point on how to use these numbers that we give you and what we're actually looking for when we put them together. So the next guy we're going to talk about is Nathan Karns. Karns has really struggled with left-handed bats in his career, but this year he's actually not been that bad. Only a 252 average allowed with only 2 home runs so far this season. The one guy who is good righty on that Detroit team, because they really don't have any left-handed bats, maybe Victor Martinez, who has always done pretty well against right-handed pitching. But the only other guy who kind of stands out is JD Martinez. He does hit right-handers very well anyway. 390 WOBA this year with a 283 ISO score. So again, he's got that high WOBA and that high ISO score that gives him a good chance to, be a guy that picks up a couple hits and maybe gets you a home run today. Karns has given up more home runs to right-handed batters, so this could be something that's in play. My problem is Martinez is very expensive today, and it's not like it's the perfect matchup for him. The perfect matchup for him would be a right-hander who gives up a ton of home runs and also struggles against right-handed bats, somebody who has reverse splits. And that's not really who Karns is. So like I said, I like Martinez, but I don't think he's somebody that's worth paying up for in cash, although he does have the upside for you to use him in a GPP. Next guy we can talk about, Jorge De La Rosa. This one is a little bit interesting to me. Now, De La Rosa is a reverse splits guy. Lefties are hitting 301 against him this year. But he also has extreme splits between home and road. At home in Coors Park, he's been getting lit up. But on the road this year, in about 30-something innings pitched, he has a 1.93 ERA with a 1.10 whip. Those are elite numbers. His batting average against is only 192 on the road. So he's basically a Cy Young candidate as long as he doesn't pitch in Coors Field. Now, this is a little bit, interesting to me, because I was thinking that Chicago was going to be a team that would be targeted today, and I still think they will be, but I don't think that the numbers really show that they're a team you should be targeting. The one guy who's pretty good lefty on lefty is Anthony Rizzo. He has a 414 WOBA in lefty on lefty matchups, so I definitely think he might be somebody that's in play. But even him, he has not hit well in about a month. So it's not like he's jumping off the page at me as somebody who I have to use. The other guy you can look at is a righty, and that's Chris Bryant, who's been hitting left-handed pitching really well. 369 WOBA with a 258 ISO score. So he's got a lot of power, which is why I think he's in play today. But like I said, the numbers don't really jump out at anybody on this team really being a great play. There is one other thing I wanted to mention with the Chicago Cubs team. Whenever Kyle Schwarber's in there, he's a left-handed bat, a young guy who came up. He's got a great power, great offensive game, but he is horrible defensively. So we tweeted out yesterday before the game started that Cesar Hernandez was a guy to look at because Schwarber's so bad behind the plate defensively that if Hernandez gets on, he's going to be looking to steal. And if he gets you a hit, a stolen base, and a run scored on DraftKings, that's 10 points. And his price was only like 26 or 2,800. So he's basically getting you 3 to 4 times value in one at bat in something that's a high likelihood if he was to get on base. So if you have any base stealers and Schwarber is in there at catcher, you want to take an extra hard look at them, especially on DraftKings, because you get that big upside if you can get that hit, stolen base, and run scored out of those guys. Schwarber is that bad defensively that he's somebody that we should be targeting against, going forward for the rest of the season. So let's see. So now we can talk about the other side of that game. We got Kyle Hendricks. He's actually been pretty good this year. His biggest struggles have come against left-handed bats, but he's still only given up a 264 average to them with 6 home runs and 49 innings pitched. So that's not horrible. Those numbers are very respectable. It doesn't scream target against him. But at the same point in time, there's some left-handed bats on that Rockies team that have been absolutely on fire. You got a guy like Carlos Gonzalez, who has 5 home runs in his last 4 games. His WOBA is 403. His ISO number is 290. So this is a guy that's just been smashing right-handed pitching, and he's been on fire lately. So I still think you got to consider him. Obviously, it's not as good as playing in Coors Park, but he can hit home runs out of Wrigley. It's not the hardest park in the league, even though it's not one that yields the most home runs. It's also not the hardest park in the league to hit one out of, especially depending on the wind direction. So we'll have to take a look at that later before the game starts. A guy like Charlie Blackmon, 384, 195. He got pulled from the game early yesterday. I don't know if it was just because they were dominating or if, he got injured or something happened. So just take a look at that before you put him in your lineup. I don't want to recommend somebody, who's not going to be playing, but he has a 384 WOBA, 195 ISO. So he's got pretty good numbers against right-handers as well. You could also look at a guy like Ben Paulson. Paulson's got a 373 WOBA with a 227 ISO number. He hit a couple home runs yesterday in that game too, and he's still kind of cheap. Away from Coors Field, some of these guys are going to go down way down in price. And somebody actually had a good article out the other day. I forget who it was. I would like to give them credit for it. But they were basically saying if you look at the numbers for the Rockies, everyone thinks they're so bad on the road, but their numbers on the road actually aren't that horrible. They had a little bit of a rough stretch there, but they got Dickerson back. He's healthy. Cargo's hitting right now. They got a lot of guys in that lineup that offensively are pretty talented. Another guy you can look at, even though Hendricks is tough on righties, Nolan Arenado has been awesome against righties this year. 392 WOBA and a 333 ISO number. So he's a big home run guy. I think he has 20 home runs already against right-handed pitching this year. So even though they're not in Coors, even though it's righty on righty, Arenado might be a guy who goes a little bit lower owned because of all those drawbacks. But again, his numbers this year against right-handers, if you look at them, you really can't argue. They're pretty eye-popping, and they hop off the page at you. Let's see. The next guy we could talk about is Ivan Nova. Left-handed bats have really been doing better against Nova in his limited innings. 293 batting average with a home run every 7 innings. So there's a couple guys on Texas that are going to be in play. I think that you could actually stack up a bunch of these Texas bats today. You got Fielder with a 413 WOBA and a 164 ISO. You got Moreland with a 401 WOBA and a 289 ISO. So he's the guy with the most power. Rougned Odor has a 375 WOBA with a 226 ISO. And he actually has the 3rd highest WOBA since being called up and reinserted into that lineup of anybody in Major League Baseball over the course of probably about a month or so. So that's pretty crazy. That's a pretty good stat for him. Again, all these left-handed bats are guys that are going to give Nova some trouble. You can also look at a guy like Sin-Soo Choo. He's got a 367 WOBA with a 228 ISO number. So he's another guy that's got, the ability to get some hits and also some upside because of the power. Next guy we can talk about is Matt Harrison. Matt Harrison is going up against the Yankees today. Now, he struggled with right-handed bats both in his 2 starts in the majors and also in all his starts in minor leagues so far this year. He's been lit up. He got lit up in his first start, and then he went into Coors Field and blanked the Rockies over 7 innings. So, I mean, I don't really know what to tell you so far in the majors. I haven't seen enough out of this kid to really say one way or another. But again, looking at his numbers, he has been knocked around by right-handed bats, which puts 2 guys on the Yankees squarely in play for me. You'll likely see Chris Young batting higher up in the order today. He's got a 398 WOBA and a 329 ISO. So he's one of the best hitters in the league against left-handed pitching, even though you wouldn't think so. But, you know, again, anytime the Yankees play a lefty, they always have Young in there, and he's been producing lately. So as a cheap option in the outfield today, I definitely think he's one of the best and has some of the most upside for a home run, especially playing in Texas, which is a pretty good home run hitter's ballpark. Speaking of home run hitters, the other guy in the Yankees that you have to consider is A-Rod, fresh off his 3 home run game last time out, which was also against a left-hander. He has a 377 WOBA and an ISO number over 300 with a 307 ISO. So he's another guy that's a big home run chance today. He's incredibly expensive on DraftKings. I think he's like 56 or 5,800 off that 3 home run game. I hope that does keep people off him because he's in probably as good, if not better, a matchup today. So I think he's somebody that's going to be worth paying up for, and he'll give you some differentiation because I don't think a lot of people are trying to pay up and put you know, A-Rod in their roster, despite the fact that he's got a great matchup today. Let's see. The next guy we can talk about is Raciel Iglesias. The pitcher for Cincinnati has allowed left-handed bats to hit 364 with a whip of 2.10. So that puts a guy like Matt Carpenter in play, 368 WOBA, 181 ISO. Again, I've said it all the time. I'm a big fan of Matt Carpenter, but he's a cash game play. He's a guy that's going to get you 1 or 2 hits. He's going to walk once. He's going to maybe steal a base. He might have an RBI or 2. He's probably going to score a run or 2, and he's going to get you between 8 and 12 fantasy points. So now that his price has come back down from well above $5,000, I think he's a guy that you can start rolling out there again because he's going to get you that 8 to 12 points, those safe 8 to 12 points. He's not going to kill you when it comes to salary, and he's going to, you know, basically give you a solid number that you can count on for your fantasy score and your cash games. If you're playing in 50-50s, I really like him. And head-to-head, sometimes you need a little more upside if you're playing some of the bigger, higher dollar values. So I don't think he's as good a play. But if you're playing in the $1, $5 head-to-heads, or you're playing in any of the 50-50s, I think he's a guy that's going to get you some solid points that you can count on, and you can roll him out there today. Colton Wong, his teammate, is a little more of a GPP play for me because he's a little more volatile. But he actually has a little bit more upside too. 359 WOBA, 184 ISO score. He makes more outs, but he also has more big hits, doubles and home runs. You know, like I said, he leads off. He can steal a base. He can score a run. You know, there's a lot of ways he can put up points as well. And I think he's in a pretty good matchup today against a guy who struggles against lefties like Iglesias does. On the other side of that game, I'm not really targeting anybody against Lance Lynn. We'll talk about that later. Mike Montgomery in the Seattle game, he's been pretty solid. If anything, he's given up a few home runs to right-handed bats, but they're only hitting about 223 against them. The one guy whose numbers stand out against lefties, though, is Paul Goldschmidt. He's got a 481 WOBA with a 303 ISO. So, again, just like A-Rod, he's another one of those guys that I think you might have to put into your lineup today, even though he's expensive just because the upside on him is amazing. And the other guy you can kind of look at is A.J. Pollock. He's got a 383 WOBA with a 198 ISO score. So not bad, but also not great. Again, if Montgomery was a weaker pitcher, I'd say you'd want to use him too. But the one guy who I think really, really stands out is Goldie, and he's probably the top option of the guys that I would want to use from this game at all. On the other side of this game, going up against Robbie Ray, Robbie Ray's actually been really good this year, and Seattle's kind of struggled a little bit. The one guy who really stands out as a right-handed bat that you can go up against Robbie Ray with is Nelson Cruz. He has a 495 WOBA, 346 ISO number, so probably the best numbers on the day are the numbers that belong to Cruz. And I think that he's a guy that you definitely want to consider. Even though Robbie Ray's been pretty good, you know, Cruz has been great against left-handed pitching this year. So he's somebody that you might want to fit in your roster. Even though he's getting expensive, I know on DraftKings he's really priced up. I think on FanDuel he's still relatively, you know, reasonable. I'll have to check, though. I don't remember. I made my lineups there last night, so I'll have to look again. But I definitely think Cruz is somebody who's in play. And the last guy we're going to talk about is Kyle Lohse. Lohse has allowed lefties to hit 279 with 10 homers in 50 innings, and he's allowed righties to hit 320 with 13 homers in 62 innings. So I think you can basically use anybody on the San Francisco team. The problem is they play at home in San Francisco, which is not a great hitter's ballpark, but they do have a couple guys whose numbers stand out. You got a guy like Buster Posey is a 395 WOBA, 179 ISO number. A guy like Brandon Belt, he's got a little more power, 283 WOBA, 223 ISO number. So he's a guy that I think could give you some upside at first base. Matt Duffy's been great this year, 370 WOBA, 172 ISO. So he's somebody that's someone you can look at to put in your rosters. And Hunter Pence is starting to hit again. He's got a 366 WOBA with a 192 ISO score. So I think you can actually stack up these Giants bats. I think that's not the worst idea ever. Lohse has been that bad this year that I think they're going to put some runs up on him. My only problem is I don't know if they're going to get enough runs to really justify paying up, in their home stadium. They don't score a lot of runs when they're home in San Francisco. Nobody really scores a lot of runs in San Francisco. So I would just temper my expectations if I was going to stack them. I wanted to talk a little bit about pitching real quick. There were 4 guys that I didn't talk about. I'm not targeting anybody against Chris Heston. He struggled a little bit with left-handed bats, but Milwaukee doesn't really have a lot of left-handed bats, especially without Lind. They're really down to just Parra and Scooter. I guess if you wanted to go after him, those would be the 2 guys to use, but neither one of them really gives me a lot of faith. I'm not looking to target any of the bats against him. Same thing with Lynn. Lynn's been a little bit of a reverse splits guy. So he's got a 258 batting average to right-handed bats, and he's been even tougher on lefties. So I'm not looking to go after any of the lefties on Cincinnati. And the right-handed bat who sticks out would be a guy like Todd Frazier, who does well righty on righty. But Lynn's only allowed 1 home run to right-handed bats. So Frazier, if you're going to pay up for him, if he's not going to hit a home run, he's really, not a great bet to pay off his salary. So that's why I didn't target anybody against Lynn. The other game that you'll notice, I didn't target anybody in that KC Cleveland game. I think it's going to be a low-scoring game. I think both of those pitchers are pretty decent. Neither one of them has been great, but neither one of them has been horrible either. And I just don't see any bats that I really want to take against those guys. Their batting average to both sides of the plate has been, pretty solid, and I just don't see a ton of upside there. So those are the guys that I'm not targeting against. So that gives us your list of all the games today. I think there's only 9 on the schedule, so it's not a ton of research for you guys to do. So take a look at some of the bats that we talked about. When lineups come out, put the ones that you like the best in there. Try to find some value with some guys that might be, getting a day off or getting moved up in the lineup or something like that. And make sure you listen to Josh, who's going to give you some advice about the pitching to use today, and put it all together. And hopefully you guys will have a good day. Thank you for joining us over here for Benny's Bats at RotoCurve. And as always, stay classy, DFS.